The Valoran Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 900 star systems, and no species had ever challenged their power. Their warships were the most feared in the galaxy, armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. When their sensors detected strange new vessels emerging from a small yellow star called Sol, High Commander Zethral felt nothing but amusement. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the small human fleet on his main display screen. There were only 12 ships, and they looked primitive compared to his magnificent armada. Their hulls were made of simple metal alloys, and their engines burned with the weak glow of fusion reactors. "What do we know about these creatures?" Zethral asked his science officer. The officer pulled up the data they had gathered from intercepted transmissions. "They call themselves humans, Commander. They are carbon-based life forms with very short lifespans. Most of them live less than 100 years. They come from the third planet of their star system, a small world covered mostly in water." Zethral's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. 100 years? That is barely enough time to learn how to walk properly. And their technology? Primitive, Commander. They achieved nuclear fission only 2 centuries ago. Their fastest ships can barely reach 1% of light speed without their crude jump drives. Then this will be easy. Zethral turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to their lead vessel. Let us inform these humans of their new status as subjects of the Valoran Dominion." The message was sent, demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. The Valorans expected fear. They expected begging. They expected the humans to recognize the hopelessness of their situation and submit without resistance. What they got instead was laughter. Aboard the human carrier Relentless, Captain Laura Mitchell received the alien transmission with a raised eyebrow. She was a woman in her early 40s, with short brown hair and eyes that had seen more than their fair share of conflict. She had commanded ships for 20 years, but this was her first contact with an alien species. "They want us to surrender," reported Communications Officer Danny Park, a young man with a talent for languages who had somehow managed to decode the alien signal in record time. "They say resistance is futile, and we should prepare for integration into their empire." Laura looked around her bridge at her crew. Navigator Chloe Vance was trying very hard not to smile. Weapons Officer Kevin Cho was grinning openly, his fingers hovering over his console. Chief Engineer Pete Dawson stood near the back of the bridge, his arms crossed over his chest, looking almost bored. "How many ships did they have?" Laura asked. 300, Captain. All of them armed with plasma cannons and gravity-based weapons. Laura nodded slowly, considering the situation. 300 ships against 12. By any normal calculation, the humans should have been terrified. They should have been preparing to surrender or flee. Instead, the mood on the bridge was almost cheerful. "Send them our response," Laura said. "Tell them we respectfully decline their generous offer." Danny hesitated for just a moment before transmitting the message. He had seen what the Relentless could do, but a small part of him still wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. On the Eternal Conquest, Asethrel received the human refusal with disbelief. In 12,000 years, no species had ever refused a Valoran demand. It was unthinkable. It was insulting. It was something that needed to be corrected immediately and violently. "All ships," he commanded, his voice cold with anger. "Open fire. Destroy them all." 300 Valoran warships unleashed their arsenals simultaneously. Plasma bolts filled the void between the fleets, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Gravity missiles twisted space itself as they hurtled toward the human vessels. Coherent energy beams, invisible except for the slight distortion they caused in starlight, converged on the tiny human formation. The barrage was overwhelming. It was absolute. It was the kind of firepower that had conquered civilizations and reduced planets to ashdot. When the light faded and the sensors cleared, the human ships were still there, every single one of them. Not a scratch marred their hulls, not a single shield had even flickered. Zethral stared at his display in complete shock. What? What happened? Why are they still there? His weapons officer checked and rechecked his readings. Direct hits, Commander. All weapons struck their targets. But the humans seemed to have some kind of defensive system we have never encountered before. Our weapons had no effect. Before Zethral could respond, a new transmission came through from the human fleet. Captain Laura Mitchell's face appeared on the main screen. She was smiling, and in her hand she held a cup of some dark liquid that she sipped casually. "I believe it is our turn now," she said pleasantly. "Mr. Cho, one shot, please." Minimum power. Just across their bow, a single beam of light erupted from the Relentless. It was white and pure and moved so fast that the Valoran sensors barely registered it before it passed. The beam missed Zethral's flagship by perhaps 50 meters, but the shockwave from its passage sent the Eternal Conquest tumbling through space like a leaf in a hurricane. 6 escort ships that had been positioned near the flagship simply ceased to exist. They did not explode. They did not break apart. They were simply gone, vaporized so completely that not even atoms remained. Alarms blared across the Valoran fleet as ships struggled to maintain formation. Zethral pulled himself back into his command throne, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. "Report," he demanded. "What kind of weapon was that?" His science officer's voice was shaking. "Unknown, Commander. Our sensors cannot categorize the energy output. It exceeds anything in our database by a factor of 10,000. Perhaps more. That is impossible." "I am reading the data directly, Commander. It is not impossible. It is simply beyond our understanding." Laura Mitchell's voice came through the channel again, still calm, still friendly, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the destruction of warships. "That was our point defense system, by the way. The small one. We use it mainly for shooting down missiles and debris." She took another sip of her drink. "Now, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Would you like to try diplomacy instead?" "We brought snacks." Zethral looked at the empty spaces where 6 of his ships had been. He looked at the 12 human vessels sitting peacefully in the void, completely undamaged by the most powerful weapons his empire possessed. He thought about his career, his pride, and his certainty that the Valoran Dominion was the greatest power in the galaxy then. He thought about what would happen if the humans used their main weapons instead of their point defense. "Systems, stand down," he ordered quietly. "All ships, stand down." His officers stared at him in disbelief, but none of them argued. They had seen the same thing he had seen. They knew that continuing the fight would mean death for all of them. "Open a channel to the human vessel," Zethral said. "Why?" His voice heavy with something he had never experienced before. Humility. "Tell them. Tell them we are willing to talk." On the bridge of the Relentless, Laura Mitchell smiled and raised her coffee cup in a small salute to the alien fleet. "See," she said to her crew. "I knew they would be reasonable." The news of the Third Fleet's defeat spread across the Valoran Dominion like wildfire. Within hours, every corner of their vast empire knew that 12 primitive human ships had humiliated 300 of their finest warships. Within days, the story had reached every species in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council was the most powerful governing body in existence. It represented 73 advanced civilizations, each one commanding fleets of thousands of ships and controlling dozens of star systems. They met on Station Prime, a massive structure that floated in the empty space between galaxies. Neutral territory where even the bitterest enemies could speak in peace. Supreme. Arbiter Noxiel called an emergency session to discuss the human situation. He was an ancient being, his body made of living crystal that pulsed with soft inner light. He had mediated disputes between species for 300 years, and he had never seen the Council so afraid. "The humans must be lying," declared Ambassador Keth of the Draven Collective. He was a massive creature, 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin like rough stone. His people were warriors, proud and fierce, and they did not accept the idea that a young species could possess such power. No civilization develops weapons of that magnitude without being detected. We have watched their system for centuries. They had barely learned to split atoms 200 years ago. "The Valoran sensor data is authentic," countered the representative of the synthesis. "A network of artificial intelligences that spanned 40 star systems. Its voice came from a floating sphere that served as its physical presence in the chamber. We have verified it independently. The humans possess technology far beyond anything currently known to the Council. Arguments erupted across the chamber. Some delegates demanded immediate military action against humanity. Others urged caution. A few suggested reaching out to the humans in peace, but they were shouted down by those who feared what such powerful beings might want. Noxiel raised a crystalline appendage, and the chamber fell silent. We have invited a human representative to address the council, he announced. They have agreed to attend. Perhaps we should hear what they have to say before we make any decisions. The delegates muttered among themselves, but settled into their seats. A few minutes later, a small shuttle docked with the station, and the council watched as a single human walked through the great doors of the assembly chamber. His name was Samuel Price, and he looked nothing like what the delegates expected. He was young, perhaps 30 years old by human standards. With messy brown hair and clothes that looked like he had slept in them, he carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder, and he walked into the chamber with the casual confidence of someone entering a coffee shop rather than the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. "Good morning," he said, scratching the back of his head. "Sorry I am late. Traffic in the Centauri bypass was murder." Ambassador Keth rose to his full height, towering over the small human. "You come before the assembled might of the galaxy, and you speak of traffic. Do you not understand the gravity of this situation? Your species has demonstrated weapons that could destabilize the entire galactic order." Samuel found an empty seat and sat down, pulling a sandwich from his bag. Sorry about the Third Fleet thing. We tried to tell them we just wanted to say hello, but they started shooting first." Took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. "Want some? It is turkey." The chamber erupted in chaos. Several delegates demanded that the human be arrested. Others called for the immediate destruction of Earth. A few simply stared at Samuel Price with expressions of complete bewilderment. Through it all, Samuel continued eating his sandwich as if he had all the time in the world. Finally, Noxiel's deep voice cut through the noise. "Human, explain yourself. Explain your species. How did you develop such technology in secret? What are your intentions toward the rest of the galaxy?" Samuel wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up. When he spoke again, his casual tone was gone, replaced by something more serious. "Fair questions," he said. "I will give you the short version. About 80 years ago, we accidentally discovered something we call subspace. Turns out the universe has a lot more layers than most species realize. Hidden dimensions, folded realities, that kind of thing. We found some interesting stuff there." He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "We found the remains of a civilization that existed before any of us. Before any life in this galaxy. They called themselves the Forerunners, and they left behind their entire accumulated knowledge from 1 billion years of existence." The chamber went completely silent. Even Ambassador Keth sat down, his anger forgotten in the face of this revelation. "Forerunner technology," the synthesis representative said, its voice carrying an emotion that artificial beings rarely displayed. "You found Forerunner technology. You found their library," Samuel corrected gently. "Everything they ever learned, everything they ever built, everything they ever discovered. It took us decades to translate it, even longer to understand parts of it, but we have made progress." He shrugged. "We did not mean to scare anyone. We just wanted to come out and meet the neighbors, see what is happening in the rest of the galaxy." "And the weapons?" Noxiel pressed. "Why did you build such terrible weapons if your intentions are peaceful?" Samuel's expression grew dark. "Because we learned what happened to the Forerunners. We learned why they are not around anymore, and we learned what is coming." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device. With a few touches, he projected an image into the center of the chamber. It showed the edge of the galaxy, where stars gave way to the endless void between galaxies. And at that edge, there was something else. A wall of distorted space barely visible, stretching as far as the eye could see. "This is the barrier," Samuel explained. "The Forerunners built it 1 billion years ago. It is made of folded space-time, layers of reality wrapped around each other to create an impenetrable wall. And do you know why they built it? No one answered. No one needed to. They built it to keep something out. Something that lives in the dimensions between dimensions. Something that consumes everything it touches. Matter, energy, thought itself. The Forerunners called them the Devourers, and at the height of their power, the technology that makes ours look like stone tools, they barely managed to hold them back. They sacrificed their entire civilization to build that barrier. Samuel looked around the chamber at the frightened faces of the galactic elite. The barrier is failing. It has been failing for thousands of years, slowly breaking down, developing cracks. And we estimate that within the next few years, the Devourers are going to break through. He turned off the projection and put the device back in his bag. That is why we built the weapons. That is why we came out to meet you. Because when the barrier fails, it is not going to matter how many fleets you have or how powerful your empires are. The Devourers will consume everything unless we stop them together. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador Keth spoke, his voice quiet and uncertain. Why should we believe you? This could be a trick, a way to make us submit to human rule. Samuel smiled, but there was no humor in it. You do not have to believe me. Send ships to the barrier. See for yourselves what is happening. We will give you the coordinates, the sensor frequencies, everything you need to verify what I am telling you. He picked up his bag and started walking toward the exit. We are not asking for your submission. We are offering our help. Take it or leave it. He paused at the door and looked back at the assembled powers of the galaxy. But I hope you take it, because we are going to need every ship, every soldier, and every species working together if we want to survive what is coming. Then he walked out of the chamber, leaving 73 civilizations to contemplate the end of everything they had ever known. 6 months had passed since Samuel Price addressed the Galactic Council. In that time, everything had changed. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now talking to each other. Trade routes that had been closed for generations were opening up. And humanity, once unknown and then feared, was slowly becoming something else entirely. A source of hope. The research station, Horizon, floated at the very edge of explored space. Orbiting a dead star that had burned out millions of years ago, it was the most remote outpost in human territory, placed there specifically because of its proximity to the barrier that the Forerunners had built so long ago. Dr. Maggie Lane stood in the main observation room, staring at the readings on her display with growing concern. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, one of the leading experts on Forerunner technology. She had spent 30 years studying the ancient civilization's remnants, and what she was seeing now terrified her. The degradation is accelerating, she said to her colleague, a Valoran scientist named Vexul, who had defected from his empire to work with the humans. The models predicted we had at least 5 years, maybe more. Vexul's mandibles clicked nervously. How long do we actually have? Maggie ran the calculations again, hoping desperately that she had made an error somewhere. She had not. 3 years. Maybe less if the degradation continues to speed up. The barrier was failing faster than anyone had anticipated. The wall of folded space-time that had protected the galaxy for 1 billion years was developing cracks. Weak points where the fabric of reality was starting to tear. And on the other side of those cracks, something was waiting. The Forerunner records called them the Devourers, but that name did not really capture what they were. They existed in dimensions that normal matter could not perceive, feeding on energy and matter, and even thought itself. The Forerunners had described them as hunger given form. It's endless and insatiable. Maggie sent her findings to Earth immediately. The response came within hours. Accelerate all weapons production. Begin fortifying key systems throughout the galaxy. And prepare for total war. The Galactic Council received the same report, but their response was less unified. Many species still did not believe the threat was real. Ambassador Keth of the Draven Collective continued to insist that it was a human trick, a way to manipulate the galaxy into submission. Admiral Lisa Cole had been assigned as humanity's military liaison to the Council. and she had learned to be patient with alien politics. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a face that had been hardened by decades of command. When she addressed the council, her voice was calm and measured. "The sensor data is genuine," she said. "You can verify it yourselves. We have given you the coordinates and the frequencies. Send your own ships to the barrier. See what is happening with your own eyes. And if we refuse?" Keth demanded. "If we choose to oppose this human expansion, instead of following you into some imaginary war?" Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you will die with the rest of us when the Devourers break through. We are not asking for your submission, Ambassador. We are offering our help. Take it or leave it." The argument might have continued for months, but the Devourers did not give them that much time. The first breach occurred 8 months later, 2 years ahead of even the worst predictions. A hole opened in the barrier near the Valoran core worlds, and something came through. The Valoran home fleet responded immediately. 1,200 warships, the finest vessels our empire possessed, converged on the breach point. High Commander Zethrel himself led the defense, determined to prove that his people could handle the threat. Without human assistance, they found a single entity waiting for them. It was impossible to describe properly because it did not exist entirely in normal space. Parts of it seemed to shift and flicker, appearing in one place and then another without moving through the space in between. Looking at it directly caused physical pain, as if the brain was trying to process something it was never designed to comprehend. The Valoran fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts, gravity missiles, energy beams, all of the weapons that had conquered 1,000 worlds rained down on the entity in a display of overwhelming firepower. The entity did not seem to notice. It simply reached out with appendages that existed partly in normal space and partly somewhere else. And it began to feed. The battle lasted for minutes. When it ended, the entire Valoran home fleet had been reduced to atoms. 1,200 ships and nearly 1 million crew members were simply gone, consumed by a creature that was still hungry. Still growing larger as it absorbed their remains, Zethrel's escape pod tumbled through the debris field, one of only a handful of survivors. He watched in horror as the entity turned toward his homeworld, a planet that had been the center of Valoran civilization for 10,000 years. He sent a desperate transmission on every frequency he could reach. "Help us, please. Anyone who can hear this. Help us." The response came within the hour. The human Second Fleet dropped out of subspace directly between the entity and Velora Prime. 30 ships, led by the carrier Relentless under Captain Laura Mitchell, formed a defensive line in front of the planet that the Valoran fleet had failed to protect. Laura stood on her bridge, looking at the tactical display with calm, focused eyes. The entity was massive, far larger than anything they had faced in simulations. It had consumed an entire fleet and was still growing. "All ships, weapons free," she commanded. "Show this thing what we have learned." The human fleet opened fire, and the battle for Velora Prime began. Unlike the Valoran weapons, human armaments had been designed specifically to fight creatures like the Devourers. They struck at the dimensional anchors that held the entity in normal space, disrupting its ability to exist in their reality. They targeted the weak points where its different dimensional aspects connected, trying to tear it apart from the inside. The entity screamed in frequencies that drove half the sensors on the ship haywire. It fought back with devastating power, its appendages sweeping through space with enough force to crush starships like paper. Evasive pattern Delta. Laura ordered as one of those appendages swept toward her carrier. The Relentless moved with impossible grace for a ship its size, dancing around the attack while continuing to pour fire into the creature. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships fell, burning and breaking as the entity's attacks found their marks. The destroyer Madison went down with all hands when a dimensional rift opened inside its engine room. The cruiser Dauntless lost half its crew before managing to limp away from the engagement. But the humans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They adapted their tactics, learned the creature's patterns, and slowly, inexorably, they pushed it back. On Velora Prime, billions of citizens watched the battle in the sky above their world. They saw human ships die to protect them, a species they had never met, sacrificing everything to save a people who had once tried to conquer them. When the final shot was fired, when the entity collapsed in on itself and vanished back through the breach it had created, the human fleet still held the line. They were battered and bloodied, half their ships destroyed or damaged, but they had won. Zethrel's escape pod was recovered by the Relentless an hour after the battle ended. When he was brought to the bridge, he found Captain Laura Mitchell waiting for him. Her uniform stained with coffee and her eyes red from exhaustion. "Welcome aboard," she said simply. "We saved your planet. Now let us talk about how to save the rest of the galaxy." Zethrel looked at this small, fragile human who had done what his entire fleet could not. He thought about his pride, his certainty that the Valoran Dominion was the greatest power in existence. And then he bowed his head in respect. "Thank you," he said. "Tell us what you need. We will follow." The battle above Valora Prime changed everything. Every species in the galaxy had watched as human ships fought and died to protect a world that was not their own, to save a people who had once tried to conquer them. The footage was broadcast across every network, translated into every language, discussed in every council chamber and marketplace from one end of explored space to the other. Billions of beings saw the Valoran fleet fall in minutes against the Devourer entity. They saw the human ships arrive, outnumbered and outmatched by any reasonable calculation, and they saw those same ships stand their ground, taking terrible losses while refusing to retreat, until the creature was finally destroyed. The fear that many species had felt toward humanity began to change into something else. It became respect. It became hope. High Commander Zethrel became humanity's most vocal supporter among the former skeptics. He traveled to Station Prime personally to address the Galactic Council, describing what he had witnessed with his own eyes. "I led 1,200 ships against the entity," he told the assembled delegates. "The finest vessels my empire possessed, crewed by the best soldiers in the Dominion. We lasted for minutes. 4 minutes before every one of my ships was destroyed, every member of my crew consumed." He paused, his mandibles clicking softly. The humans had 30 ships. 30. And they fought for 6 hours. They lost half their fleet, thousands of their people, and they never once considered retreat. They stayed because my world needed them. They died because my people were in danger. Ambassador Keth of the Draven Collective rose from his seat. For months, he had been the loudest voice against humanity, insisting that their power was a trick, their warnings about the Devourers a manipulation. Now his stone-like face showed something that looked almost like shame. "I was wrong," he said simply. "The humans are not our enemies. They came to save us, and we questioned their motives. They offered help, and we demanded proof. They warned us about the threat, and we called them liars." He turned to face the human delegation, led by Admiral Lisa Cole. "On behalf of the Draven Collective, I apologize. And I ask, what do you need from us?" Lisa stood up, her iron-gray hair catching the light of the chamber. "We need everything," she said. "Ships, soldiers, scientists, resources." The breach at Valora Prime was just the beginning. Our sensors showed dozens of weak points forming along the barrier. More entities are coming, and they will be stronger than the one we just destroyed. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy, marked with red points where the barrier was failing. "We cannot fight this war alone. No single species can. But together, combining our strengths, sharing our knowledge, we have a chance." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every species on the Council agreed to work together. They created the combined Galactic Defense Force with humanity at its head, not because humans had conquered them, but because humans had earned the right to lead. In the months that followed, the galaxy transformed. Shipyards that had built warships to fight other species now built vessels designed to combat the Devourers. Scientists from dozens of civilizations worked together, sharing research that had been kept secret for millennia. Human engineers taught Forerunner technology to anyone willing to learn. Holding nothing back, Admiral Laura Mitchell, promoted after the Battle of Valora Prime, led the combined fleet in engagement after engagement. More breaches opened across the galaxy, and more entities pushed through. Each battle was costly. Each victory came with a price measured in ships destroyed and lives lost. But they kept winning. The humans fought alongside Valorans, their former enemies now their most reliable allies. They stood with the Draven Collective, whose warriors had learned to respect human courage. They coordinated with the Synthesis, whose artificial minds helped process the vast amounts of data needed to track and respond to new threats. The war continued for 2 years. 2 years of constant fighting, constant sacrifice, constant loss. The combined fleet grew from a few hundred ships to over 10,000, but the Devourers kept coming. For every entity they destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear. On Earth, a small office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Samuel Price worked to coordinate the war effort. He was no longer a simple diplomat. The Council had appointed him as the overall commander of the combined Galactic Defense Force, a position he had accepted with characteristic reluctance. His aide, a young Valoran named Crix, brought him the latest reports. 3 more breaches in the Outer Rim, she said. The Synthesis is requesting immediate reinforcement. Samuel nodded, making notes on his tablet. Send the 5th and 7th fleets, and tell Admiral Mitchell to begin planning for Operation Star Dawn. Crix hesitated. Operation Star Dawn was humanity's greatest gamble, a plan so audacious that many thought it was insane. Are you sure? The weapon is not fully tested. If it fails, we are no worse off than we are now. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean that had given birth to his species so long ago. The Forerunners held the Devourers back for 1 billion years with the barrier. We cannot rebuild it, but we can do something they never tried. We can take the fight to the enemy. The plan was simple in concept, but almost impossible in execution. A fleet of specially designed ships would cross the barrier to enter the dimension where the Devourers lived and strike at the source. They would carry weapons powerful enough to damage the very fabric of that dimension, making it impossible for more entities to form. It was a one-way mission. The ships that went through would never come back. Everyone knew it. Everyone accepted it. Admiral Laura Mitchell had volunteered to lead the mission personally. When Samuel tried to talk her out of it, she had just laughed. Sam, I have been fighting these things for 2 years. I know them better than anyone. I know how they move, how they think, how they die. She smiled, the same confident smile she had worn when she first faced the Valoran Third Fleet with 12 ships. Besides, this is the most important mission in the history of the galaxy. You really think I am going to miss that? The volunteer list for Operation Star Dawn was overwhelming. Humans, Valorans, Draven, members of the Synthesis, representatives of dozens of species, all wanted to be part of the mission. Laura had to turn away thousands of applicants because there simply were not enough ships. The final fleet consisted of 50 vessels, each one carrying the most advanced weapons ever created. Their crews represented every major species in the Council, united by a common purpose: to end the threat of the Devourers forever. No matter the cost, Dr. Maggie Lane was among them, leading the scientific team that would guide the fleet through the hostile dimension. She had spent 3 years studying the Devourers, and she was determined to see her work through to the end. You do not have to do this, Samuel told her during their final meeting before the launch. You have given enough already. Maggie smiled, her tired eyes brightening for a moment. I've spent my entire life studying the past, trying to understand what the Forerunners built and why they built it. Now, I have a chance to help build the future, to make sure there is a future. She shook her head. I would not miss this for anything. The launch ceremony was held above Earth, with representatives from every species in the Council in attendance. The 50 ships of Operation Star Dawn floated in formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of humanity's home star. Admiral Laura Mitchell stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the Horizon, named after the research station where the first warnings had been detected. She looked out at her fleet, at the faces of humans and aliens who had chosen to follow her into the unknown. This is Admiral Mitchell to all ships, she broadcast. In a few minutes, we are going somewhere no one has ever gone before. We are going to find the Devourers in their home. And we are going to make them understand something very important. She paused, letting her words sink in. We're going to make them understand that this galaxy is not their feeding ground. Not anymore. Not ever again. The fleet began to move, accelerating toward the largest breach in the barrier, the doorway to a dimension of pure hunger and darkness. Behind them, the galaxy watched and hoped. The barrier loomed before them like a wall at the edge of reality. From a distance, it was almost invisible. Just a faint shimmer in the starlight that marked where normal space ended and something else began. Up close, it was terrifying. The fabric of space-time twisted and folded in patterns that hurt to look at. Layers of reality stacked on top of each other in ways that defied comprehension. Admiral Laura Lara Mitchell stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching the barrier grow larger on her display screens. Around her, the 50 ships of Operation Start-On maintained perfect formation, their crews silent and focused. "How long until we reach the breach point?" she asked. Navigator Chloe Vance, who had served with Laura since the first contact with the Valorans, checked her instruments. 12 minutes, Admiral. All ships report ready. Laura nodded and activated the fleet-wide channel. All hands, this is Admiral Mitchell. In 12 minutes, we will cross the barrier into the dimension where the Devourers live. I am not going to lie to you. We do not know exactly what we will find there. We do not know if our weapons will work as expected. We do not know if we will survive. She paused, looking around her bridge at the faces of humans and aliens alike. Chief Engineer Pete Dawson stood at his station, his expression calm and determined. Weapons Officer Kevin Cho had his fingers resting lightly on his console, ready to unleash hell at a moment's notice. Communications Officer Danny Park monitored, the channels translating between a dozen different languages as the fleet coordinated their final preparations. But I do know this, Laura continued. We are here because the galaxy needs us. We are here because someone has to stand between the Devourers and everything we love. We are here because we refuse to give up, refuse to surrender, refuse to accept that the darkness would win. She smiled, and there was fierce joy in her expression. So let us show these creatures what happens when they threaten our home. Let us show them that the galaxy is not theirs to consume. Let us show them what it means to face humanity and all our allies together. Across the fleet, cheers erupted. Human voices mixed with the clicking of Valoran mandibles, the rumbling of Draven warriors, the synthesized tones of artificial intelligences. 50 ships, crewed by beings from across the galaxy, united in a single purpose. The breach point appeared before them, ragged tear in the barrier where reality had simply given up trying to hold itself together. Through the gap, they could see colors that did not exist in normal space, shapes that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. All ships engage crossing protocols, Laura ordered. Stay in formation. Watch each other's backs. And remember why we are here. The Horizon was the first ship through the breach. The crossing was like nothing any of them had ever experienced. For a moment that might have been a second or an eternity, they existed in multiple states at once. Their bodies and their ships stretched across dimensions that human minds were never designed to comprehend. Some crew members screamed. Others prayed. A few simply closed their eyes and waited for it to be over. Then they were through. And they found themselves in a place beyond imagination. The Devourer dimension was not empty. It was filled with structures that defied physics, vast constructs of pure hunger given form. And everywhere, there were entities. Thousands of them, millions, more Devourers than had ever crossed into normal space. All of them turning toward the intruders who had dared to enter their realm. Well, Laura said quietly, now we know where they all come from. Dr. Maggie Lane's voice came over the intercom from her station in the science bay. Admiral, I am detecting a central structure approximately 50,000 kilometers ahead. The energy readings are off the scale. I believe that is their source, the place where new entities are formed. Laura studied the tactical display. The central structure was surrounded by countless Devourers, and more were appearing every second, drawn by the presence of prey in their dimension. The fleet was outnumbered by a factor of thousands to one. She smiled. Then that is where we are going. All ships full speed ahead. Clear a path to the target. What followed was the most intense battle in galactic history. Human ships fought alongside Valoran destroyers and Draven battlecruisers. The synthesis contributed unmanned vessels that threw themselves into the enemy with calculated precision. Every weapon, every strategy, every trick that the combined fleet had learned over 2 years of war was brought to bear against the endless tide of devourers. Ships fell. Good people died. The carrier Defiance was torn apart, protecting a Valoran cruiser. The destroyer Swift gave her life buying time for the science vessels to complete their scans. One by one, the 50 ships of Operation Stardon were whittled down, but they kept moving forward. 20 ships remaining, Pete Dawson reported, his voice strained. Engine power at 60%. Main weapons at 40%. It is enough, Laura replied. How far to the target? 10,000 kilometers. Maybe less. Laura opened a channel to the science bay. Maggie, are you ready? The weapon is charged and targeted, Maggie replied. One shot is all we need. One shot, and we collapse the entire structure. Without it, the Devourers cannot reproduce. They cannot form new entities. They will eventually fade away. What about the ones already in our dimension? They will be cut off from their source of power. They will weaken over time, become easier to destroy. Within a few generations, they will be gone completely, Laura nodded. A few generations of cleanup would be easy compared to what they had already faced. All ships, maximum acceleration. Get us to that target no matter what. The final push was brutal. More ships fell, their crews giving everything to buy another second, another meter of progress. The Devourers threw everything they had at the intruders, but the fleet kept coming, refusing to stop, refusing to die. The horizon reached the target zone with only 7 ships still operational. Laura looked at the massive structure before them, a thing of pure hunger and darkness that had spawned the creatures threatening to destroy everything she loved. For the galaxy, she said softly. Then louder, Maggie, fire. When ready, the weapon discharged. It was not like any conventional blast. It was a wave of pure destruction that attacked the very fabric of this twisted dimension, unraveling the structures that allowed the Devourers to exist. The central formation collapsed in on itself, its energy dissipating into nothing. Across the entire dimension, the Devourers screamed. They were not dying, not yet, but they were losing something vital, something that connected them to their source of power. Their movements became sluggish, their attacks weaker. Target destroyed, Maggie reported, her voice filled with exhausted triumph. It worked. It actually worked. Laura allowed herself a moment to breathe. Then she turned to her crew. Now we just have to get home. The return journey was almost impossible. The breach was closing, the dimension collapsing in on itself now that its central structure was gone. The 7 surviving ships raced for the exit. Pushing their damaged engines beyond any safe limit, they lost 2 more ships in the final sprint, their crews choosing to fall behind and hold off the pursuing Devourers so the others could escape. When the horizon finally burst through the breach into normal space, only 5 ships remained. Behind them, the breach sealed itself permanently. The barrier, freed from the pressure of the Devourer dimension, began to heal. For the first time in thousands of years, it was growing stronger instead of weaker. The fleet that had watched them leave erupted in celebration. Signals of joy and relief flooded every channel as the galaxy realized what had happened. The Devourers were cut off. The threat was ending. On Earth, Samuel Price watched the transmission with tears in his eyes. The war was not over yet. There were still entities in normal space that needed to be hunted down and destroyed. But the worst was behind them. Humanity and its allies had faced the darkness and won. Admiral Laura Mitchell sat in her command chair, exhausted beyond words, surrounded by the remnants of her crew. They had lost 45 ships and thousands of lives. But they had saved the galaxy. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. From first contact with the Valorans to the council chambers of Station Prime, from the desperate defense of Valora Prime to the final assault on the Devourer Heartland, Humanity had gone from unknown primitives to the saviors of galactic civilization. And through it all, they had never stopped laughing in the face of impossible odds. Admiral Danny Park said quietly, "We are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Everyone wants to know what happened. What should I tell them?" Laura smiled, the same confident smile she had worn from the very beginning. "Tell them the galaxy is safe. Tell them we are coming home. And tell them," she paused, looking out at the stars that would shine for billions of years to come. "Tell them humanity says you are welcome. The war was over. The long night was ending. And across 1,000 worlds, beings of every species looked up at the stars and knew that because of one small, stubborn, endlessly courageous species, they would live to see another dawn."